The forest was quiet yet heavy with anticipation. Mist rolled over the dark pines, curling around twisted roots and jagged rocks as though the very earth were holding its breath. Deep in this ancient wood, Lyra moved cautiously, her boots barely making a sound on the moss-covered ground. Her heart raced not from fear of the wilderness itself, but from the ritual that awaited her. She had been chosen, marked by fate, to join the pack, to take part in a ceremony that would bind her to their alpha, Kale. For generations, the ceremony had been a test of endurance, loyalty, and spirit. For Lyra, it was a mixture of dread and curiosity. She had heard stories, tales whispered in the wind, carried from one forest village to another. The Alpha was merciless, bound by ancient law, feared even by his closest allies. Yet there were hints of something else hidden beneath the cold steel of his gaze, a loneliness that made his power feel heavier than any crown. The clearing appeared before her like a stage from another age. Stone pillars, carved with symbols of old magic, encircled a central dais. Firelight danced on their surfaces, casting long shadows that seemed to shift like living creatures. Members of the pack were already gathered, their eyes fixed on her as she stepped into the circle. She felt their scrutiny like a physical weight, pressing against her back and shoulders. Kale stood atop the dais, his figure tall and commanding, wrapped in a dark cloak that seemed almost alive. Even from a distance, she could feel the pull of his presence, strong, unyielding, yet tinged with a sorrow that set her nerves alight. He did not speak, only observed, and in that silence, Lyra understood that every action, every glance, every step she took would be measured and remembered. The elder, a wizened figure with hair as white as the winter snow, stepped forward. His voice was soft, yet carried easily across the clearing. "Lyra of the Wanderers," he said, "you have been chosen by the spirits and by fate. You will enter the rites of the Alpha, and your strength, courage, and heart will be tested." Lyra bowed her head, feeling the weight of tradition settle on her shoulders. "I am ready," she said, though her voice wavered despite her determination. She could feel the eyes of the pack on her, some curious, some skeptical, others cautious, as though questioning whether she was worthy of the trial. Kyle descended the dais with a fluid, almost predatory grace. His boots made no sound on the stone, and yet every movement seemed to echo through the clearing. When he finally stopped before her, Lyra could see the sharpness in his eyes, the hard lines of his face softened only by shadows that hid pain too deep to speak. "You know the laws," he said, his voice low and measured. "The ceremony is not a choice. It is a bond forged by fire, by endurance, and by truth. Do you understand what awaits you?" Lyra straightened. "I understand," she said, but inside her stomach churned. She had heard of others who had failed the trials. Some were sent away, shamed and broken. Others were never seen again. Kale's gaze did not waver. "Very well. Let the trials begin." The first test was one of endurance and will. Lyra was asked to stand in the center of the clearing while the pack chanted, a low hum that seemed to reverberate through the very soil. Shadows moved in strange patterns across the stone pillars, and a cold wind circled her, tugging at her hair and cloak. The elder intoned words older than memory, calling forth the spirits of the forest to witness her strength. Lyra felt the cold seep into her bones, the wind biting at her skin. Yet she stood firm. Each breath became a struggle, each heartbeat a drumbeat of defiance. She could hear Kale's footsteps approaching, steady and deliberate, and she knew his presence was a test in itself. He moved around her in silence, his eyes never leaving hers, as though he could read her very soul. "You are strong," he said at last, though his words were more observation than praise. "But strength alone is not enough. You must understand the weight of your bond, the cost of what you seek to join." Lyra's throat tightened. I wish to be worthy," she said. The words sounded small in the grand expanse of the clearing, yet Kale nodded slightly as though her honesty mattered more than courage or skill. The second trial was one of mind and spirit. She was led to the edge of a small cliff, where the mist swirled thickly and the night seemed to stretch endlessly. Kyle did not speak. He merely watched as she stepped forward, each step echoing in the quiet. The elder's voice came again, whispering of visions and truths that the spirits would reveal. Lyra closed her eyes and let the mist envelope her. She saw flashes of Kale's past, the burdens he had carried, the lives he had lost, and the curse that shadowed his existence. It was not merely power he wielded, but isolation, responsibility, and sorrow. She felt a pang of sympathy, though she did not allow it to show. Compassion could be a weakness here, and the trial demanded more than sentiment. When she opened her eyes, she saw Cale standing near the cliff's edge, his silhouette framed by silver mist and moonlight. There was a tension in the air, a connection that neither had spoken aloud, yet both felt. Lyra realized then that the trials were not only to test her, but to test him too. Perhaps it was in her choices, her courage, her very presence that Cale could confront the darkness within himself. The final part of the trial for the night was one of obedience and trust. Cale instructed her to follow him through the forest, across jagged rocks and narrow paths without question. Every misstep, every hesitation would be noticed. Every moment she faltered would test not just her resolve, but the bond forming between them. Lyra obeyed, though her mind swirled with doubt and uncertainty. She hated the rigidity of the ritual, the way Cale seemed to measure her every move, and yet, as they walked, she began to see him differently. Not as a tyrant, but as a being shaped by centuries of pain and duty. There was loneliness behind his eyes, a longing buried beneath layers of authority and fear. By the time they returned to the clearing, the first light of dawn was creeping through the trees. The pack had been watching silently, and the elder spoke again. "You have endured the night. You have faced your fears. Your spirit tested by strength, vision, and trust. The bond begins to form, but this is only the first stage. The true trial is yet to come." Lyra sank to her knees, exhausted but exhilarated. Her body ached, her mind reeled with visions, and her heart was uncertain. She felt a pull toward Cale she could not name, a mixture of fear, respect, and something deeper, more fragile. Cale stood over her, silent. His presence was heavy but not unkind. "Rest, Lyra," he said, his voice softer than before, though it carried the same authority. "Tomorrow the ceremony continues. What you endure will shape not only your future, but mine as well. Do not take this lightly." Lyra nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She knew that the coming days would test her like never before, pushing her to her limits and beyond. And yet, despite the dread, a spark of determination burned within her. A determination to prove herself, to survive, and perhaps to reach the hidden heart behind Cale's steel. As the mist rose again and the forest swallowed the clearing in its quiet embrace, Lyra could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The path ahead was dark, treacherous, and uncertain, but it was hers to walk. And as she glanced toward Cale, standing tall and silent, she wondered if he, too, would find the strength to let someone in, to face the loneliness that had haunted him for so long. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying a secret promise. The trial had begun, but the story was far from over. Somewhere in the shadows, fate waited, and the choices they would make together or against each other would echo through the generations yet to come. Lyra took a deep breath and rose, ready to face whatever dawn might bring. She had survived the first night, but the true challenge, the trial of heart, spirit, and bond, was yet to come. And in the stillness of the forest, she felt it, a thread of connection thin but undeniable, stretching between her and the Alpha. One look, one unspoken truth, one lingering glance, and the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The morning sun filtered weakly through the thick canopy of trees, casting fractured light across the misted forest. Lyra awoke with a start, her body stiff from the trials of the night. Her muscles ached, and yet there was a thrill beneath the fatigue, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She remembered the glimpses of Cale's soul, the weight he carried, and a part of her wished she could unravel it, touch it, and understand the man behind the Alpha. She rose quietly, careful not to disturb the sleeping pack members. The clearing they had returned to the night before seemed different in daylight, less ominous, more alive. The fire pits had burned low, leaving only smoldering embers that glowed faintly. She could hear the faint rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a bird, and the unshakable sense that the forest itself was watching. Cale had already begun pacing the clearing when she stepped forward. His presence was immediate, filling the space with authority and quiet danger. He did not speak at first, simply observing her as she approached. Lyra could feel the pull of his eyes, like gravity drawing her toward him, testing her resolve without a single word. "You have endured the first night," he said finally, his voice calm yet carrying a weight that pressed against her chest. "Do you understand that the trials ahead will be far more demanding? Strength alone will not suffice. You will need courage, clarity, and heart." Lyra swallowed. "I understand," she said, though the knot of apprehension in her stomach tightened. The previous night's visions of Cale's past haunted her mind. She had seen glimpses of his pain, the curse that forced him to rule with both fear and isolation. Now she realized the ritual was not merely about obedience, it was about understanding him, and perhaps understanding herself. The elder stepped forward, holding a ceremonial staff carved with symbols of fire and shadow. "The second stage begins," he intoned. "This day will test your trust. You will face the shadows of your fears, and only those who endure shall move closer to the bond." Lyra's gaze flickered to Cale. His expression was unreadable, yet she sensed a quiet challenge in his eyes. He was testing her, but she also felt that he would face the trials himself in ways no one else could see. The pack formed a ring around the clearing, their chants rising in a low hum. Shadows lengthened and twisted unnaturally as the forest seemed to darken, carrying a sense of both wonder and foreboding. Lyra's first task was revealed, a path that led to a narrow ravine shrouded in mist and lined with jagged rocks. Cale's voice rang out, calm but commanding. "Walk the path, Lyra, do not falter. Do not question. Only trust that each step brings you closer to the bond." The first step was hesitant. Mist curled around her legs, wet and cold, and she could hear the faint whispers of the forest. Shadows appeared to move, taking shapes that suggested memories she had tried to forget. Fears of failure, of isolation, of never belonging. Every step required effort not just of her legs but of her mind. She felt the pull of doubt, the urge to turn back, yet Cale's presence loomed beside her, silent but commanding. "You must not falter," he said softly, his voice carrying through the mist. "Do you understand?" "Yes," Lyra whispered, though the words felt fragile. The shadows seemed to twist closer, forming visions of what could be. Failure, loss, rejection. Lyra's heart hammered, but she forced herself onward. Every step was a battle against the mind, against fear, against the pull of uncertainty. And yet with each stride she felt something growing within her. Resolve, strength, and the strange sense that she was not alone. Cale did not touch her, yet his presence was an anchor. She felt him in her thoughts, a quiet reassurance that tempered the fear. For the first time, Lyra realized that the Alpha's authority was not merely in power or fear. It was in the ability to guide, challenge, and protect even without words. The ravine widened, revealing a pool of dark water, black as night, reflecting the shapes of the trees above. The elder gestured toward it. "This is the mirror of truth. Look into it. See yourself. See the path you must walk." Lyra approached slowly, kneeling at the edge. The water was still, smooth as glass. She peered in and gasped softly. The reflection was not merely her own. It showed her intertwined with Cale, their forms shadowed and merging, as if the forest itself recognized the bond forming between them. She saw fear, yes, but also courage, determination, and a spark of something deeper. Connection. Cale's voice broke the quiet. "Do you see?" Lyra nodded, her fingers brushing the surface of the water. "I see what we could be," she whispered. Her heart thumped with a strange rhythm, caught between fear and fascination. The trial demanded trust, and for the first time, she felt the weight of it in its entirety, not just her own survival, but the fragile beginnings of understanding Cale and perhaps reaching him. "You are not yet finished," Cale said, stepping closer. He extended a hand, not to command, but as a challenge. "Step forward. Show your courage." Lyra hesitated, then took a deep breath. She rose, meeting his gaze. The mist swirled around them, almost as if holding its breath in anticipation. Slowly, carefully, she placed her hand in his. The contact was brief but electrifying, a spark of understanding passing between them. Cale did not smile, but there was a subtle softening in his eyes, a recognition of the effort she had made. The final trial of the day was one of endurance and obedience. Cale led her to a cliff overlooking the forest, the wind whipping around them, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth. "Stand," he commanded. "Do not move, do not speak until I return." Lyra obeyed, though her legs trembled and the cold wind bit at her skin. She watched as Cale disappeared into the trees, leaving her alone with the vastness of the forest. Time stretched endlessly, and she felt the pull of doubt, the whisper of fear, the ache of loneliness. Yet she did not falter. She remembered his words, the mirror of truth, and the spark that had passed between them. Hours seemed to pass before Cale returned. He was silent, but there was a weight in his presence, a sense of judgment tempered with something else. Respect, perhaps. Lyra could not name it, but her heart leapt in quiet acknowledgement. "You endured," Cale said finally, his voice low, almost reverent. "Few would have held through as you have. Remember this feeling, Lyra. This is the path you have chosen, and the path you walk will shape not only your future but mine as well." Lyra lowered her gaze. "I will not fail," she said, though inside her mind swirled with uncertainty. The trials were only beginning, and yet she felt a strange sense of purpose, a thread of connection to the Alpha that both terrified and intrigued her. The elder stepped forward, his staff tapping the ground lightly. "The day's trials are complete. Rest and prepare for what is to come. The bond grows stronger with each step, and tomorrow you will face a challenge unlike any before." Lyra felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. The first stage had tested her courage and her mind, but she knew the true trial awaited. The Alpha's past, the curse that bound him, and the forest itself would push her in ways she could not yet imagine. As night fell, the clearing transformed once more. The firelight danced across stone pillars, shadows stretching and twisting as if alive. Lyra sat quietly, her thoughts tangled with visions, fear, and a growing fascination with Cale. She understood now that the ritual was not only a test of obedience, but a test of understanding, empathy, and the courage to face not just the Alpha, but herself. And somewhere in the shadows, Kyle watched her, his expression unreadable. He did not move, he did not speak. Yet Lyra felt the invisible thread that connected them, a bond that was forming quietly, dangerously, and irrevocably. The forest whispered its secrets, carrying the promise of trials yet to come. Lyra could feel her resolve solidifying, her courage sharpening, and the faint, undeniable pull of the Alpha's presence at her side. Tomorrow the ritual would intensify, and tomorrow, Lyra realized, the first true test of heart and spirit awaited, and neither she nor Cale would leave unchanged. The forest was heavy with the scent of rain and earth as Lyra followed Cale deeper into the territory of the pack. The canopy above blocked most of the sunlight, leaving the world in a twilight haze where shadows danced like living spirits. Each step forward carried the weight of expectation, yet beneath it lay something more subtle, the thread of connection forming between her and the Alpha. Cale walked silently beside her, his presence commanding yet not oppressive. Lyra had begun to notice small changes, subtle gestures that revealed a side of him the pack rarely saw. His eyes, once cold and impenetrable, now held a flicker of something she could not name, a vulnerability perhaps, or a recognition that she was not like the others. "You are thinking too much," Kyle said abruptly, breaking the silence. His tone was sharp but not cruel. "Fear and hesitation will weigh you down. Trust your instincts." Lyra drew a deep breath. "I am trying," she said softly. Her heart thumped. She wanted to ask him about the visions she had seen in the mirror of truth, about the curse that haunted him, but the words died on her lips. There was a wall around Cale that not even curiosity could pierce easily. They reached a narrow ravine, where jagged rocks jutted from the ground like the spines of some ancient creature. The elder's voice echoed in her memory. "The bond grows through trials of courage, trust, and endurance." "This is your next test," Cale said. "You must cross this ravine alone. No guidance, no hesitation. Only those who trust themselves will succeed." Lyra's stomach twisted. The gap was wide, and below it the rocks glistened with damp and moss. One misstep could lead to serious injury. Yet she did not retreat. She remembered the thread of connection, fragile but present, that bound her to Cale. Perhaps that thread would give her the courage to step forward. With careful steps, she began to cross. The rocks shifted beneath her weight, and the wind howled through the ravine, tugging at her hair and cloak. Each step required focus, balance, and a quiet determination. She could feel the pack's eyes upon her, waiting, judging, yet there was something more than judgment in their gaze, a recognition that she was enduring, that she was brave. Halfway across, the mist thickened, swirling around her like ghostly fingers. Shadows formed shapes in the fog, visions of failure, loneliness, and fear. Lyra's pulse raced. Doubt crept in, whispering that she would falter, that she would disappoint Cale and the pack. Then a firm hand gripped her shoulder. Cale's voice was low, resonant, carrying authority without command. Breathe. Focus. You are stronger than your fears. Lyra drew in a shaky breath, feeling the steady weight of his presence beside her. She could not see him clearly in the mist, yet the reassurance anchored her. Step by step she moved forward, relying on courage more than certainty. When she finally reached the far side, she collapsed briefly, breathless but triumphant. Kyle's gaze was steady as he helped her rise. There was no praise in his eyes, yet in that moment Lyra felt the acknowledgement of her strength. It was not admiration, it was respect. And respect, she realized, could be just as powerful as love. The next trial was one of truth and confrontation. Kyle led her to a small glade, where the trees arched overhead like the vaulted ceiling of some ancient cathedral. Fireflies hovered, casting flickering light across the mossy ground. In the center of the glade, a shallow pool reflected the stars above, though it was still daylight. "Look into the water," Kyle commanded. "See yourself as you truly are. Your strength, your fear, your courage. Face it, or you will not endure what comes next." Lyra knelt at the edge of the pool, gazing into the water. The reflection that stared back was not merely her own. It was an intertwining of her form with Kale's, a shadowed figure beside her, invisible yet present. Her heart stuttered. She had seen it before in the mirror of truth, but this felt different. It was not a vision of possibility. It was a reflection of reality waiting to emerge. "You hesitate," Kale said quietly, standing behind her. "Do you understand what the bond demands?" I think I do," Lyra said, though the words felt fragile. "It is not just strength. It is trust, and understanding, and courage to face what comes next." Kale's eyes softened ever so slightly. "Yes, and courage to see the truth of others even when it is difficult." Lyra turned to him, her gaze steady despite the fluttering of her heart. "Your truth," she said softly, "is not what everyone sees. But I see it, and I want to understand it." Kale's expression hardened, then softened again. "Few wish to see the truth, Lyra. Most only fear it. You are not like the others." The glade fell silent. Lyra felt the weight of his words, of the moment, of the connection that had grown between them. It was a delicate thread, taut with tension, yet undeniably present. The bond was forming, yet both of them were aware of its fragility. One misstep, one word could unravel it. Suddenly, a rustle in the shadows drew their attention. Members of a rival faction within the pack emerged, their eyes glinting with malice. They sought to disrupt the ritual, to challenge Kale's authority, and perhaps even claim Lyra for themselves. Kale's stance shifted instantly, commanding and protective. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice low and dangerous. Lyra obeyed without hesitation, her senses alert. Though the rival faction was smaller in number, their intent was clear. They would not stop until they achieved their goal. The confrontation was swift and tense. Kale moved with precision, a blur of controlled power, while Lyra followed his lead, her courage steady despite fear. She realized then that the trials were not only about endurance or trust, they were about survival, about understanding Kale's world, and discovering her own place within it. When the rivals were finally driven back, Kyle turned to her. There was no triumph in his gaze, only intensity. "You did well," he said quietly. "Your courage saved you. And me." Lyra's chest tightened. "I only followed your lead," she said, though she knew she had acted of her own strength as well. "No," Kale said, his voice firm. "You acted because you were strong. You faced fear, pain, and uncertainty, and you endured. That is what matters." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting the glade in golden light, Lyra felt exhaustion mingled with exhilaration. She had survived the trials, faced the shadows, and confronted the dangers that lurked in the forest, and through it all, the bond with Kyle had grown stronger, more complex, and infinitely more compelling. Yet neither of them spoke of what lingered between them. The quiet acknowledgement of connection, the understanding that this bond was more than duty or ritual. It was fragile, dangerous, and full of possibility, and both knew that the next stage of the trials would push them further than they had ever imagined. That night, Lyra could not sleep. She lay beneath the ancient trees, listening to the wind whisper through the branches. Images of the day, the ravine, the pool, Kyle's steady presence flickered in her mind. She felt fear, yes, but also a strange thrill, a sense that something profound was forming between them. and in the distance Cale stood watch, silent as always, yet not unfeeling. He had seen her courage, her determination, and perhaps glimpsed the spark of loyalty, understanding, and resilience that could change not just the ritual, but the path of his own burdened life. The night stretched long, heavy with anticipation. Lyra realized that the bond was no longer theoretical. It existed, tenuous and dangerous between them. And when dawn came, the next stage of the ritual would begin, a test of heart, trust, and the strength to face the past and future together. In the silence of the forest, both alpha and mate felt it, the threads of destiny intertwining, delicate and fragile, yet unyielding. The real challenge had only begun, and the choices they would make could shape not only their bond, but the fate of the pack, the forest, and the ancient magic that watched them from the shadows. The forest was quiet, almost eerily so as Lyra followed Cale through the winding paths between towering pines. The morning mist clung to her cloak, cold and damp against her skin, yet she walked steadily, her resolve firm. The trials of the previous days had tested her courage and endurance, but she knew the true challenge awaited, the one that would test her heart and spirit, and perhaps Cale's as well. Cale walked beside her, silent as always. His presence was a steadying force, yet it carried weight. Lyra had begun to see glimpses of the burden he bore, a heavy cloak woven of centuries-old duty, loneliness, and a curse that no one could lift but himself. Each time he glanced at her, she saw the flicker of something unspoken, a question, a hesitation, perhaps even fear. They arrived at a secluded glade, surrounded by ancient stones etched with runes of old magic. The elder's voice, though distant in memory, echoed in her mind. To understand the bond, you must see the heart behind the mask. Cale turned to her, his gaze intense. You have endured much, he said softly, but endurance alone does not reveal truth. To face the next stage, you must understand me, and I must see you truly as well. Lyra's heart quickened. She had glimpsed fragments of his past in the mirror of truth, but now she felt the weight of the moment. This trial would not be about fear or strength. It would be about revelation, understanding, and the courage to face what had long been hidden. Show me, she whispered. Show me what you carry. Cale's eyes darkened and he stepped closer. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Few have asked that of me, he said quietly. Fewer still have been willing to see. With a deep, steadying breath, Cale raised his hands and the stones around them began to glow faintly, shimmering with a silver light. Shadows twisted and shifted within the glow, forming images of a life long lived in solitude. Lyra watched as scenes unfolded. Cale as a young alpha bearing the weight of a pack, making decisions that cost him friends, allies, and perhaps even love. She saw the curse that had bound him, an ancient magic that demanded sacrifice, obedience, and a loneliness that stretched across decades. Lyra's chest tightened. She had expected power, authority, even cruelty, but she had not expected sorrow so deep, so palpable. She felt tears prick her eyes, though she blinked them away. Compassion and understanding surged within her, and she realized that this was part of the bond. They were not merely testing each other's strength, but each other's hearts. You carry it all alone, she said softly. The pack, the curse, the loneliness. It is too much for one soul. Kyle's gaze met hers, and for a moment the walls around him faltered. It is my burden, he said quietly, and it has kept me from trusting anyone. Until now. Lyra reached out, not touching him, but letting her presence speak. You do not have to bear it alone, she said. I am here, if you will let me. The tension between them was electric, a quiet storm of emotion, trust, and fear. Cale did not speak, but the faintest nod of his head acknowledged her words. It was not surrender, not yet, but it was recognition, and recognition was the first step toward connection. Their moment was interrupted by a rustle in the trees. Lyra's pulse quickened. The rival faction of the pack had returned, bolder than before. They stepped into the glade, eyes glinting with malice and intent. Cale's stance shifted instantly, protective and commanding. Stay behind me, he ordered. Lyra obeyed, though she felt no fear. Not now. Not after witnessing Cale's vulnerabilities and the bond forming between them. This time, the challenge was not only physical but emotional. She needed to trust Cale, and he needed to trust her in turn. The rival faction advanced, and the confrontation was swift and tense. Cale moved with precision, his movements a blur of controlled strength, while Lyra followed instinctively, her mind and body attuned to his guidance. She realized then that the trials had prepared her, not only for endurance but for partnership, for trust, and for understanding the depths of Cale's world. When the rivals were finally driven back, Cale turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You have learned much," he said quietly, "but the true trial is not over. You must now face the bond itself, what it demands of heart and spirit and what it asks us to give to each other." Lyra nodded, though her heart fluttered. She understood now that the trials were not merely about obedience or courage. They were about connection, empathy, and the willingness to confront not only the dangers around them but the shadows within themselves. That night, the forest was silent except for the whispering wind. Lyra sat beneath an ancient oak, staring into the glowing embers of a fire she had built. Kyle stood nearby, his silhouette dark against the silver light of the moon. There was distance between them, yet an invisible thread seemed to pull them together, taut and undeniable. "You have changed," Cale said quietly, his voice low, "not because of the trials, but because you see more than others see. You see the truth of me, and the truth is dangerous even to those who love me." Lyra turned to him. "I do not fear it," she said softly. "I do not fear you. I want to understand it, and I want to be part of it if you will let me." Kyle's gaze softened, a rare, fleeting warmth in the depths of his eyes. "Few offer such understanding willingly," he said. "Fewer still offer it without expectation. You are unlike any who have come before." Lyra's heart raced. She did not know what the future held, nor did she know if the bond could survive the coming trials. Yet she felt a quiet certainty that they were forging something real, something beyond fear, duty, or obligation. Suddenly, a distant howl echoed through the forest, sharp and threatening. Lyra's body tensed. Cale's eyes narrowed, and he moved toward the sound, his form a mixture of power and vigilance. "They approach," he said. "The rivals are gathering strength. Tomorrow's trial will not only test our bond, it will test our courage, our loyalty, and our ability to face danger together." Lyra stood, feeling a surge of determination. She had faced visions, shadows, and fear itself, and she had endured. Now she realized the real challenge was to stand beside Cale, not merely as a follower, but as a partner. The forest seemed to lean in, listening, waiting for the next move, the next test of heart and spirit. As night deepened, Cale and Lyra sat in silence. Words were unnecessary. The unspoken connection between them was stronger than any speech could convey. The trials had begun to strip away fear, leaving only trust, respect, and the fragile beginnings of understanding. Lyra thought of the future, the days to come, the challenges they would face, and the bond that was growing stronger with every step. She knew the road ahead would be treacherous, that shadows of the past and threats from the present would test them endlessly. Yet for the first time she felt a spark of hope. The bond was no longer an abstract notion. It was real, fragile but undeniable, and it carried the promise of something greater than either of them had ever known. In the stillness of the forest, Cale rose and moved to the edge of the glade, his eyes scanning the horizon. Lyra followed, her gaze meeting his. For a moment the world fell away, leaving only the two of them, standing together, bound by trials, trust, and the quiet pulse of possibility. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of rain, earth, and change. Lyra felt it deep in her bones. The forest, the trials, and Cale himself were all part of something larger, something eternal. The bond between them was growing, and with it, the courage to face the trials yet to come. And as the moon rose high, casting silver light over the ancient stones, Lyra knew one thing with certainty. The next day would test everything they had endured so far, and would demand that they face not only the dangers of the forest and the rival faction, but the truths of their own hearts. The dawn broke with a hush over the forest, casting pale golden light over the glade. Mist clung to the trees, curling around their trunks like ghosts of the past. Lyra rose quietly, feeling the weight of what was to come. Today would not be a simple trial. It would test her courage, Cale's strength, and the fragile bond they had forged through fear, endurance, and understanding. Cale stood at the edge of the glade, his silhouette tall and imposing. There was no anger in his eyes, no command, only an intensity that spoke of responsibility and expectation. Lyra approached, feeling the thread of connection between them tighten, pulling her forward. "Today, you will face the trial that determines everything," Cale said, his voice steady but low. "You must face not only danger but your own hearts, the shadows that linger within us both." Lyra nodded. She had endured so much already, visions in the mirror of truth, the ravine, the rival faction, and the solitude of the night. Nothing, however, could prepare her for what lay ahead. She knew that the true test was not just physical, but spiritual, a test of trust, courage, and the willingness to face each other completely. The elder appeared, his staff glowing faintly in the morning light. "This is the trial of shadows," he announced. "You will confront the darkness within yourselves, and only those who endure together will succeed. Fear is your enemy, but truth is your guide." Lyra and Cale stepped forward, entering a circle of ancient stones etched with runes that pulsed with silver light. The air shimmered around them, thickening, heavy with magic. Shadows began to rise from the ground, twisting and writhing into forms both familiar and strange, echoes of past mistakes, regrets, and fears. Lyra's breath caught. She saw images of herself failing, of Cale alone, burdened and unyielding. The shadows whispered, calling forth doubts, insecurities, and fear. Her first instinct was to flee, but Cale's presence steadied her. He did not reach for her, did not speak commands, he simply stood beside her, a quiet anchor. "You face your shadows," Cale said softly. "Do not fight them. See them, understand them, and trust me." Lyra swallowed hard, forcing herself to look directly at the shadows. Each one represented a part of her fear, a memory of weakness, a reflection of doubt. Yet she also saw a spark of strength in every shadow, a reminder of courage, resilience, and determination. Step by step she moved forward, acknowledging the darkness without letting it consume her. Beside her, Cale faced his own shadows. Lyra could see glimpses of the burden he carried, choices that had cost him dearly, moments of solitude, and the curse that had forced him to rule with isolation and fear. Yet there was also resolve, wisdom, and the quiet, unspoken desire for connection. The shadows writhed and surged, testing them relentlessly. They whispered threats, illusions of danger, and the ache of loneliness. Lyra felt her knees tremble, her heart hammering. But she did not falter. The bond she shared with Kyle, built on trust, understanding, and courage, held her steady. Kyle's voice broke the whispers of the shadows. "Together," he said simply, "we endure. Together we face the truth." Lyra met his gaze, her heart catching. The thread between them pulsed stronger now, binding them through fear, trust, and determination. Step by step, they moved through the shadows, facing their deepest fears and accepting the truths that had long been buried. Finally, the shadows began to fade, dissolving into silver mist. The forest returned to its quiet majesty, the ancient stones glowing faintly as if blessing their endurance. Lyra felt a surge of relief and exhilaration. She had faced herself, faced Cale's world, and emerged stronger. Cale turned to her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "You have endured," he said quietly, "not because the shadows were defeated, but because you faced them with courage and understanding. That is what the bond requires." Lyra's chest tightened. "We faced them together," she said, "and I feel the bond stronger than ever." Cale's eyes softened, and for the first time a hint of warmth appeared in his gaze. "Yes," he said, "stronger and perhaps unbreakable." The elder stepped forward, his staff glowing brighter. "The trial of shadows is complete," he announced. "You have faced fear, trust, and the truth of each other. The bond you have forged today is not only strong, it is sacred. It is a bond that will endure trials yet to come, but one that has proven its power." Lyra felt a quiet awe. The journey had been long, filled with fear, challenge, and revelation. But in the end, she had not only survived, she had grown, understood, and connected in ways she had never imagined. And Cale. Cale had revealed a part of himself that few had ever seen. The forest seemed to hum around them, a gentle, approving melody that spoke of destiny and magic. Lyra and Cale stood side by side, bound by trials, trust, and the fragile but undeniable bond they had created. Cale's voice broke the silence, low and deliberate. "The trials are over for now. But know this, our journey is only beginning. The bond we share will be tested again by the world, by the pack, and by the shadows within us. But today we have forged something eternal. Lyra felt tears prick her eyes, though she did not let them fall. She nodded, understanding the weight of his words. I will stand by you, she said softly, no matter what comes next. Cale's gaze met hers, unwavering. And I by you, he said. For a long moment the world held its breath. The forest, the stones, the wind itself seemed to acknowledge the connection between them, quiet and profound. Night fell, and the forest was bathed in silver light. Lyra and Cale remained in the glade, standing together, their forms outlined by the gentle glow of the ancient stones. There was no need for words. The bond was real, sacred, and undeniable. They had endured fear, confronted the shadows, and emerged stronger, not just as individuals, but as partners bound by courage, understanding, and trust. In the distance, the forest whispered, carrying the echoes of trials past and the promise of challenges yet to come. Lyra and Cale knew their journey was far from over, but in that moment, standing together in the quiet majesty of the ancient forest, they felt a truth that could not be denied. The bond they had forged was unbreakable, a connection of hearts and spirits that would endure all trials. As the moon rose high, casting silver light over the glade, Lyra rested her hand near Cale's, though not touching. The silent promise between them was clear. They would face whatever came together, with courage, trust, and the unyielding strength of a bond tested by fire, shadow, and truth. And in the quiet of the night, the forest seemed to hum with life, acknowledging a bond that had grown from fear and trial into something sacred and eternal.